The ballroom of the Global Leadership Forum in Brussels shimmered with false dignity, marble floors reflecting empty words, velvet curtains muffling inconvenient truths. The elite had gathered for another night of speeches no one would remember and deals no one dared to speak aloud. At the center of it all stood Donald Trump, resplendent in a dark blue suit that barely hid the orange sheen of his makeup, his red tie flapping like a warning flag. And there, standing at the edge of the room, flanked by African security officers in ceremonial garb, was Ibrahim Traoré, stoic, calm, and draped not in designer brands but in the woven heritage of Burkina Faso. The difference in presence was so stark, it made cameras shake. As Trump took the microphone, he didn't begin with policy. He began with provocation. Well, what a costume, General, Trump said, smirking. Is that a Halloween outfit or are you auditioning for a Wakanda sequel? A wave of smug laughter rolled through the more sycophantic sections of the room. Some Western leaders chuckled nervously. Others exchanged glances, not at Traoré, but at Trump, suddenly unsure of who had misstepped. Traoré didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his boots echoing across the stone floor like warning drums. He didn't need a microphone, the room, suddenly, was silent. He scanned the crowd, then locked eyes with Trump. Says the clown in orange makeup, he said flatly. It was not shouted. It didn't have to be. The silence that followed was volcanic. The camera flashes ceased. The smirks froze. Someone in the corner choked on their champagne. Trump's jaw tensed, not because of the insult, but because of the laughter that began to ripple around the room, low and real. And growing. Traoré didn't wait for permission to continue. While you play dress up in your makeup and ties, real leaders bleed for their people. You come to forums to be seen. I come so my people aren't forgotten. Trump opened his mouth, then shut it. The cameras caught it all. The ballroom had shifted. Traoré had not just answered a mockery, he had dismantled it. And he wasn't done. That night, social media exploded. The clip went viral in 22 countries before morning. But for Traoré, it wasn't about going viral. It was about setting the tone. This was not a room he walked into to impress. It was a battlefield, and he was here to conquer. After Traoré's strike, sharp, controlled, and lethal in its delivery, the room tried to breathe again. Someone coughed. A nervous aide fumbled with their glass. One delegate whispered, "Did he just say that?" as though the words themselves might explode if spoken too loudly. Trump didn't respond. His orange hue seemed deeper under the lights, as if heat had finally reached him. But before anyone could deflect or pivot, Traoré stepped forward again. And the crowd, instinctively, parted. "You know what's funny?" he said, his voice louder now, slicing through the room like a scythe. "Every year, you fly to these summits, dressed like kings, talking about democracy and order. And every year, the world gets bloodier, poorer, and quieter, especially in places like mine." He wasn't pacing, he wasn't performing, he was declaring. "You dress like saviors," he continued, eyes scanning the Western leaders. "But your hands are stained. You mock the clothes I wear, but mine carry my people's thread. Yours carry stock options." Gasps flickered through the room, not because the words were false, but because they were true, too true to say aloud. Traoré didn't care. His presence had become a mirror, and no one liked what they saw. Trump finally raised his voice. "You think this is about fashion? You think mocking me makes you a leader? You're a soldier, that's all. No army, no economy, no power." Traoré smiled. "There it is," he said, stepping even closer. "The fear. The old colonial voice that says only the West decides who leads. That because I carry a rifle, I can't carry a vision. But your empire built soldiers, and now you fear what we've become." Reporters scribbled frantically. Cameras zoomed in. Live streams exploded with messages. "Who is this man? Why is no one stopping him? He's right. No economy?" Traoré echoed. "Yet your corporations circle my continent like vultures. No power? Yet you send spies, drones, and debt collectors to kneel us. If we're weak, why are you afraid?" Trump's mouth opened again, but this time it was drowned out by the crowd. Applause. Slow at first, then building. Delegates from the global south rose to their feet. Even a few from Europe hesitated, eyes darting, torn between allegiance and truth. Traore wasn't just speaking anymore. He was commanding. This was no longer a ballroom, it was a courtroom, and Traore was the prosecution. Trump attempted to shake off the rising tension, but the weight of Traore's words clung to him like wet cement. He turned toward his allies, senators, advisors, a few Gulf state officials, but their expressions were no longer armor. They were masks slipping in slow motion. Some looked away. Others stared down at their notes as if they could rewrite the moment by ignoring it. Traore stood alone. Yet somehow, he filled the space like a storm fills the sky, not loud, but undeniable. You see, he said, lifting his hand slowly as if offering something invisible, there was a time when you could mock a uniform like mine. When a suit and tie gave you the authority to laugh at the ones who bled for their people. But those days are dying, like your dominance. Trump chuckled bitterly. You're giving a speech, Traore. But no one's following you. But even as he said it, the contradiction hung in the air like smoke. No one interrupted Traore. No one booed him. No one turned away. Traore nodded, almost as if Trump had made his point for him. You're right. I don't want followers. I want equals. And that's what terrifies you. He turned toward the crowd. Because if Africa stands as your equal, your entire illusion crumbles. Your clown makeup runs. Your golden towers become hollow. Your empire becomes just noise. Gasps. A flash from a reporter's camera. Phones vibrated as real-time captions spread Traore's words across continents. Your empire becomes just noise. Trump took a step forward, his voice dropping. You're one man. No military, no nukes. No seat at the real table. Then why, Traore asked calmly, did you flinch when I walked in? It was surgical, not shouted, not barked. Just placed gently in the air, like a scalpel sliding between bones. Trump didn't respond. Traore looked around. You say I'm just a soldier, but that's what your history made me. A soldier who watched your bombs fall, who saw your freedom bury villages, who heard your democracy arrive with tanks. So yes, I am a soldier. He paused. But I'm the soldier your empire trained, and now regrets. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the roar of shame, the echo of unspoken truth, and the slow realization that the man in the military uniform had just conquered a room built for kings. Trump leaned on the podium, fingers gripping the edge like he was trying to anchor himself. His eyes darted across the room, searching for an ally, a cue, something, anything, that could help him regain control. But control was no longer his to command. The crowd wasn't laughing, they weren't even blinking. Traore had changed the room's gravity. I remember, Traore began, voice steady but rising, when Africa was a joke to this chamber. When your analysts said we were nothing but dust and debt. When your generals called us low priority. When your corporations sent contracts, not partners. When your presidents smiled in front of cameras and stole behind closed doors. He paused, then looked directly at Trump. And then you dressed it all up in patriotism and called it leadership. Trump scoffed. You talk a big game, Captain, but you're standing on American soil. Traore didn't flinch. So did Martin Luther King. So did Malcolm X. So did every voice you silenced when truth was inconvenient. I'm not afraid of standing here. You should be afraid of what I'm standing for. The room shifted. Foreign leaders whispered to aides. Cameras refocused. American officials, once firm in posture, now leaned back, unsure if they were witnessing a debate or a dismantling. Your version of order, Traore continued, was always about obedience. Your freedom required silence. Your stability was bought with bullets and bribes. Trump raised a hand like he was about to interrupt, but Traore beat him to it. You want to talk about outfits, he said with a smirk. At least mine was earned. Yours looks like you lost a bet to a mirror. The audience broke. Laughter. Applause. Not the polite kind, the raw, involuntary kind. The kind that meant people were no longer afraid of who sat at the top. Trump's face reddened. "I am not your punchline," he growled. Traore stepped forward, and the room tensed. "You made yourself one." "All I did was hold up the mirror." It was no longer just an exchange of words. It was a reversal of power. One man spoke with the memory of colonized nations behind him, the other, with the desperation of an empire cracking under its own weight. And for the first time, America watched as the suit was silenced by the soldier. The press conference room was no longer under Trump's control. The laughter that echoed after Traore's cutting line had done more than bruise his ego, it cracked the illusion. The illusion that the world still bowed to a once dominant West. That mocking a soldier would silence him. That a tailored suit could overshadow a uniform earned in blood and discipline. Trump tried to reassert himself. He adjusted his tie, stepped forward, and threw up both hands like a circus ringmaster begging for applause. "Let's not forget," he bellowed, "this man leads a nation smaller than some of our counties. He talks tough, but he relies on charity, U.S. aid, U.S. military discretion. Without us, you'd be nothing but a uniform in the dirt." Traore didn't blink. "You confuse charity with control," he replied. "You think feeding a man while holding him by the throat is mercy." The room froze. "You think aid is kindness? You think pallets of rice erase decades of pillaged mines, puppet regimes, and private contractors who drained our rivers and souls? You created poverty, then handed us breadcrumbs and called yourselves saviors." Trump chuckled bitterly. "Look who's talking about saviors. A captain with no navy. A leader whose country can't keep its lights on." Traore tilted his head. "Yet here I am. On your stage. Uninvited, yet unforgettable." That line hit harder than thunder. The reporters in the room, even those from conservative outlets, felt it in their chests. Traore didn't need power the way Trump understood it. He didn't need missiles or markets. His weapon was memory, of oppression, of resistance, of survival. And worse for Trump, the world was listening. "You call me a soldier like it's an insult," Traore added. "But your soldiers wear medals earned from bombs dropped on weddings. Mine wear scars from defending villages. Tell me, which uniform holds more honor?" Trump clenched his jaw. "You think you're a threat to the West?" Traore smiled, not out of arrogance, but clarity. "I'm not a threat. I'm the reminder. Of what you did. Of what we endured. And of what's coming next." The room didn't cheer this time. They just sat in stunned silence. Because every word felt like a prophecy. And Trump, for the first time in decades, looked small. Not out of height. Not out of age. But out of relevance. Trump's face had gone tight, a mix of forced composure and boiling humiliation. He had spent decades commanding stages, silencing rivals with swagger and showmanship. But this wasn't a rally crowd drunk on slogans. This wasn't a boardroom where everyone owed him a paycheck. This was a global spotlight, and Traore had just flipped the switch. "I don't need to shout to be heard," Traore continued, calmly stepping closer to the podium. "You've built an empire on volume. On spectacle. On noise. But noise fades. Substance remains." Trump threw up his hands theatrically. "Here we go with the poetry again," he snapped. "You think sounding clever makes you a leader? We built systems. Infrastructure. Governments. And when they fall apart, who gets the call? America." Traore nodded. "Exactly. Because when the world catches fire, they look to the arsonist to bring a bucket." That drew gasps. Even the journalists couldn't hide it this time. Phones were out, flashes fired. The quote would headline every outlet by sundown: "They look to the arsonist to bring a bucket." Trump's smirk wavered. "You gave us roads," Traore said, "but they led to your ports. You gave us schools, but the history books erased our heroes. You gave us armies," trained by your generals, to suppress our own people. You didn't build Africa. You built walls to keep us in. Is that what you think this is? Trump barked. A moral crusade? You talk about scars and truth like that makes you strong. But the world runs on deals, power, capital, none of which you control. Traore stepped forward again, now nearly side by side. You mistake control for strength. But strength is refusing to kneel, when kneeling would be easier. It's holding a line when you're outgunned. It's speaking truth when it would be safer to stay silent. Trump's voice cracked slightly, his tone sliding into desperation. You won't win. Africa will still need the West. Traore turned to the cameras, addressing the millions watching around the world. Africa doesn't need a new master. We need memory. And fire. And unity. And the West, he glanced sideways, needs to remember the world is watching now. And we're not afraid anymore. The air was electric. Every word landed like a drumbeat in a rising march. Traore wasn't simply answering Trump, he was speaking to every young African leader, every worker still wearing colonial chains in a modern disguise, every nation told to stay quiet or stay dependent. He wasn't just defying Trump. He was rewriting the script. Trump wasn't used to silence. Not this kind. Not the kind where eyes weren't glued to him, waiting for his next insult or slogan. The cameras were still rolling, but the lens had shifted. The world had stopped orbiting his ego, and it was now pulled by the gravity of Traore's presence. He cleared his throat, straightened his red tie, and jabbed a finger at the stage. Let me remind you, he said, voice loud but unsteady, who's built the vaccines, the weapons, the satellites, the internet. You're using our microphones to attack us. Traore didn't blink. And yet, somehow, we're still dying in your silence. In your shadow. Trump opened his mouth, but Traore cut in, still calm, still composed, but sharper than a scalpel. You say you built satellites, he said, but you use them to spy, not to connect. You built weapons, but not to defend, only to sell. Your vaccines came with contracts, not compassion. And your internet? He pointed to the phones lighting up around the room. It finally gave us a voice. The audience shifted. The journalists weren't scribbling, they were recording. Diplomats leaned in. Even aides who had once stood in stiff silence now looked affected. Trump scoffed. You talk big for someone with no navy, no air force, no economy that matters. Traore smiled gently, as if amused. That's the thing with underdogs. You only notice us when we're too loud to ignore. But it's not about fleets or GDP. It's about hearts that won't be bought. About voices that won't be silenced. And a generation that won't inherit fear. He walked slowly across the stage, past the flags, past the smug faces, and stood at the edge, looking out, not just into the room, but into history itself. You think power is something you hold in your hand, he said, but real power is when millions stand behind you, not because they have to, but because they believe. Trump's face reddened, not with rage this time, but with something worse, realization. For the first time, he wasn't just losing control, he was becoming irrelevant. Then Traore turned, delivering the final blow with the precision of a seasoned warrior. You once said, "Make America great again." But you can't even make America listen. The room went still. And just like that, the soldier had silenced the showman, not with a shout, but with truth. A wave had swept through the hall. It wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was subtle, like a tide pulling back before the crash. The tension had changed flavor, and this time, it wasn't fear that filled the air. It was recognition. People weren't just watching Traore anymore, they were leaning into him, drawn by something deeper than rhetoric. Something raw. Unfiltered. Honest. Trump felt it before he even understood it. That awful, aching stillness. The kind that meant the cameras were no longer his. The kind that meant even his allies were checking their phones, not for his quotes, but for Traoré's. In the front row, a delegate from Brazil whispered to the Ghanaian ambassador, that line, about power being belief. My God. Behind them, a French journalist tweeted, Traoré just said what no one dared. He's not a leader. He's a storm. Trump tried to speak again, but the air around him had shifted. His voice, so famously loud, so infamously commanding, now landed with a dull thud. His insults, once greeted with chuckles and tension, now drew uncomfortable glances. He looked out and saw faces, stone still, some turned away, others blank. But Traoré wasn't finished. He looked directly at Trump and spoke, not with anger, not even defiance. Just clarity. You mock my uniform, he said, but I wear it for those who died without one. For those who fought without medals, who resisted without parades. You see cloth and call it weakness. But this cloth carries blood. It carries legacy. And it will carry Africa forward. Trump rolled his eyes. Oh, spare me the drama. Traoré stepped forward. You want to talk about drama? His voice now thundered, just once. You painted your face orange and called it leadership. You built walls and called it strategy. You silenced children and called it order. You locked out the world, and now, you find yourself locked out of relevance. Gasps echoed. Even the American delegation stirred. And then came the applause. It started with a slow clap from somewhere in the African bloc. Then another. Then the Arab League. Then South America. By the time Europe began to shift uneasily, it was too late. The room had made its decision, not by vote, but by heartbeat. And Trump? He stood there, arms stiff at his sides, watching as his grip on the room dissolved, not because he was out-argued, but because he was outgrown. Trump's jaw clenched as the room thundered with applause, but not for him. He turned slowly, scanning the delegates, looking for someone, anyone, still in his corner. A nod, a smile, a stiff smirk of allegiance. But there was none. Only a silence between claps, and in that silence, a truth he had never prepared for, he was no longer feared. Traoré stood calmly, arms behind his back, like a soldier surveying the field after the battle was already won. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He let the silence speak for him. Trump tried to laugh it off. Enjoy the moment, Captain. You'll be forgotten by tomorrow. But that only made it worse. Traoré's gaze sharpened. If you think history forgets those who speak truth to power, then it's your legacy that's already gone. Someone from the Scandinavian bloc chuckled. Another from the African Union whispered to a nearby journalist, this isn't just a speech, it's a funeral. Trump straightened his jacket, but the crease didn't fix the crumbling facade. The more he tried to act unaffected, the more the mask slipped. The audience was no longer buying the showman. His jokes fell flat, his bravado rang hollow. Even his signature smirk began to look desperate. You see, Mr. Trump, Traoré continued, you built a career dressing hate in humor, cloaking fear in flags. But when the makeup fades, what's left? A man, or a mask? Trump slammed his fist on the podium. I've led a nation. Built empires. You're just another third-world thug playing hero. Traoré didn't flinch. And yet here we are. You're shouting. I'm standing. You're mocking. They're listening. You needed makeup to feel powerful. I needed truth. The room held its breath. Then, from the press box, a photographer snapped a photo, Trump's face frozen in frustration, Traoré behind him, head held high, calm and unwavering. That image would later go viral. Captioned simply. The man who didn't flinch. As the final words lingered in the air, the world paused, not because Trump had spoken, but because Traore hadn't finished yet. The moderators tried to move on. The schedule was already in shambles. But Traore raised his hand slightly, not to speak over, but to claim what had already become his moment. He stepped forward, closer to the podium where Trump still stood, flushed, fists clenched, and visibly rattled. "Donald," Traore said calmly, no microphone needed, his voice cutting through the chamber, "you've always mistaken volume for strength, and insult for leadership." The room was so quiet that the ticking of an old UN wall clock echoed like a drumbeat of justice. You wore the suit, but never earned the burden. You wrapped yourself in a flag but never bled for the people. And now you try to laugh from behind orange paint, hoping no one sees the fear beneath it. Trump's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Traore didn't wait. In Africa, we honor those who fall with dignity. But we also bury those who refuse to stand for truth. And I promise you, our lands, our people, our voices, will not be mocked again. He turned toward the world leaders seated in stunned silence. To every nation here, you may choose to follow clowns in makeup, or soldiers of conviction. But history doesn't wait for indecision. And neither will Africa. The applause didn't erupt. It built, wave by wave, like a rising storm. Soft at first, then roaring, then deafening. Trump stepped back, nearly tripping over his own shadow. And Traore? He walked forward, not away from the stage, but through it. Past the lights. Past the cameras. Past the old world, and into the new one he was shaping with every word, every step, every stand. Later that night, a journalist tweeted a single line. The soldier wore no medals. The clown wore no mask. And the world finally chose. That tweet broke 1 million retweets in 48 hours. The last line belonged to Traore.